Iran's historical enemies. Well, as any old nation, Iran has had many, many, many enemies, right? But let's focus after Safavid era, which we in our other videos, which I hope people check out, we already refer to them as
So just give a date,
Safavids.
please. Yeah, date also included.
They came to power in the 16th, 15th century, basically following the fall of Ilkhanid Empire, the Mongolian Empire, and they laid the foundation for modern Iran, basically. You know, the religion of modern Iranians, largely the geographical location, all of that pretty much was formed during Safavid era. Interestingly, during Safavid era, we had our first contact with European empires in a direct and indirect way. At the time, the major European empire in global stage was the Spanish and Portuguese crown, royalty. And the Portuguese were very much active in southern Iran. They conquered Bahrain, which was regarded as part of Iran at the time. They took over even southern shores of Iran, different ports. And in that time, Iran actually established connection with the East India Company, British East India Company, and through the help of British East India Company and combination of forces, basically, Safavid dynasty and some local rulers in the south, they managed to get rid of the Portuguese Empire and pretty much destroy them. And there is very little of their influence left. So these are considered some of the earliest contacts between Iran and European empires that would go on to dominate the world. After that, again, during Safavid era, largely Iranian relations with Europeans remained good, especially with the British and others to an extent, because Ottomans were aligned with the French, and in court of Iranians there were quite a number of British people active, and they helped Shah Abbas greatly in organization of army, organization of spies, and that sort of thing. And and because they were seen as Safavid were seen as somebody who could distract Ottomans from their activities in Europe, so Europeans were quite a big fan and they supported Safavid at different times. But as time goes on and we get to Qajar era, things start to shift because British starts to encroach from India towards Iranian territory, and then you have Russia from the north pushing southward. Peter the Great, in fact, pretty much conquers half of Iran at some point. He's forced to pull back after Nadir Shah, the king that follows the Safavid, immediately beats them back. And then they sort of later on, Agha Muhammad Khan Qajar again beats them back. So, but then when British and Russia become the main enemies of Iran, Iran starts to look to Napoleon for assistance and France. That turns out to be a big mistake because Napoleon is defeated before he can. Napoleon was planning to go. Like they were trying to connect through Caucasus when Napoleon defeats the Russians and all that. So that didn't work out very well for Iran, and Iran starts to lose a lot of significant amount of territory in the east to east and south to the British, and northwest to the Russian. In fact, there are two events in Iranian history, two treaties signed between Iranian Empire and the Russian Empire that are viewed by the general public as some of the most humiliating defeats in Iran's history. In these treaties, what is now called Armenia and Azerbaijan and half of Georgia are separated from Iran. And for Qajars especially, but for all Iranians, these places had huge symbolic and not just symbolic, and a lot of national pride rested there. And this was like, for example, Dasht Mogan, which is half in Iran, half in Azerbaijan now. It was the place where Iranian kings would announce their king hood. I don't know. They announced that they're kings now. All right, just get on with it. And so these were seen as hugely humiliating to Iran, and they kind of showed how backward Iran was, at least in terms of a nation state, in relation to Russia and Europeans, because Russia was seen as the weaker of European empires. So there is a deep, there is a deep rivalry between Russia and Britain in Iran. In Iran, and they try to control politicians and people. In the South, Britain pretty much sets up a sort of apartheid state. They control the oil and everything. There is different bathrooms for Iranians than for the British, that type of thing. In the North, Russians have a lot of influence. And this is, by the way, we are
Sorry,
talking
is
about
this?
the time.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is this late 1800s or is this already early 1900s?
No, 1800s. With 1900s, 10 years in, there's a revolution in Russia, in which the October Revolution, which leads to Russia basically pulling back from Iran. Russian white forces left without a leader in Iran. So this is mostly 18th century, and this is when the great game is played by Britain and Russia in Asia, and by other great powers, that they're trying to carve up Asia among themselves. And there is in fact a plan to carve up Iran at this point into 3 different pieces: the south for the British, the north for the Russian, and a small center remaining for the Iranian local government. When the Russian Revolution happens, this is one of the things that sort of they publish publicly as a way to the Bolsheviks to prove that the Tsarist regime was an evil regime, and that actually helps Iran to, not get basically carved up by great powers. But following the Russian revolutions, Russian sort of, they fall back in terms of like influence and all that. So you have British basically controlling all the politicians, controlling everything. Reza Khan comes to power with the support of British General Ironside, and if I'm not mistaken, Lorraine, British ambassador in Iran, play a very important role in his rise to power, I suppose. And I would say Iranian public, even to this day, they have a huge resentment towards the British culture. Well, British elite and politicians and all that. And there's always, there's a book by Jack Straw, I think, that is, the name of the book is based on an Iranian saying that is always, there's a British behind everything, or there's an Englishman behind everything. So that these, in modern times, these are the conflicts that dominated Iran. Following the 1953 coup and removal of Mossadegh, America, which until then had a very, very positive image in Iran, you even have an American teacher fighting in Tabriz, fighting with constitutional revolutionaries, and there is a tomb in his name in Tabriz. So Iranians had a very positive image of US as a sort of somebody who was fighting European colonialism. But following the coup d'etat, increasingly America becomes the focus of Iranian hatred and resentment of foreign interference and all that. And these days, I would say, since the heavy sanction regime came back under Obama, and then the maximum pressure campaign under Trump, again, there's a lot of resentment towards American politicians, although I would say that the British thing is still a very, very strong presence in Iran. And it's good, not good, but it's important to point out that Iranians also have significant resentment towards Arab nations and Arab leaders. In my view, not towards Arab people, because, for example, there was an Iranian actor who one time described an event as a joke. Like he said something that, and in that telling of the story, he said, this Arab man, like in a negative way. He didn't say anything negative. He said it with a very, very bad tone. and there was a massive public pressure campaign that you should apologize. You shouldn't. We have many Arabs in Iran. Even if you want to criticize, you should. If and he came and he apologized. He meant I didn't mean any Arab. I meant this specific person. Blah blah blah. So I think, but Iranians are very resentful of, uh, you know. Arabic leaders and their attempts. They think they're always trying to, uh, plot against them and undercut them. There is also a great amount of rivalry between Iranians and Turks. I mean, for during all of Safavid era for 300 years, were very very they were rivals, and uh, Ottomans were controlling all Arab lands. They were the country we had the most borders with. So there are also those type of rivals going on, but I suppose, yeah, if you want to net a list of enemies and why.
Okay, that was really great. Really great. So, the British thing is funny. When I lived in Iran, I never picked up on the hate. I mean, I was a kid, and and I think the hate towards the British had decreased a bit, probably because they had become much more relevant. But that's very fascinating and interesting. But so was Iran has never been quote unquote colonized, though, right?
No, no, Iran has never been colonized. The plan was sort of fell through. Iran was sort of Iran was. I mean, there is an argument that during the later stage of Qajar, southern Iran was pretty much a British colony, but at least it officially wasn't. And no, because in fact, Indians and Arabs to an extent view Iranians and Turks as colonizers. For a lot of them, the history of empires doesn't start with European empires. It starts with Islamic and Turkic Perso empires. So no, Iran was never officially colonized, but I would say the situation in late Qajar era Iran and early Pahlavi Iran was similar to that of South America following the collapse of the Spanish Empire, in that British money was running everything. Everybody was in the pocket of the British in one way or another. So